The glove doesn't hide your clumsiness, Eleanor. It only makes people wonder about the ugly scar underneath. Julian Croft leaned down, his smile still perfectly aimed at a laughing guest nearby. But his words, whispered only for Ellie Vance, sliced colder than steel. Her cloth paused mid-wipe, the red wine stain still bleeding across the polished hardwood floor, glowing under the chandelier like spilled blood. Ellie lifted her face, the polite smile of a waitress intact. But, for a fleeting moment, a shadow flickered in her eyes. At the corner table by the tall window, Arthur Sterling lowered his fork. Through the swirl of his Bordeaux, he had seen it. The immaculate smile, the tiny stiffness in the girl's posture. To him, it looked like the first crack in a flawless porcelain vase. The Sterling lantern glowed like a painting stretched on canvas. Golden light from chandeliers poured over mahogany floors. A soft jazz piano floated through the air. Crystal glasses clinked, polished silver chimed against porcelain. Patrons spoke of stocks, gallery openings, and summer homes in Napa. Every detail reassured them that they were safe, refined, untouchable. Ellie moved among them like a dancer, a tray of wine glasses balanced perfectly in her hands. To the untrained eye, she was grace itself. But watch closely, the subtle pivot of her hip when the tray grew heavy. Compensating for her left hand always sheathed in a sleek black glove. The faint recoil when that gloved hand brushed a hot table edge, followed instantly by a mask of composure. And in her mind, she was sketching. Every curve of a wineglass, every false smile, every shaft of crystal light was another line on an invisible canvas. This restaurant was her prison. And yet, it was also her unwilling studio, the price she paid to fund her place at the Academy of Art. Julian Croft's polished shoes clicked across the floor. To the guests, he was hospitality incarnate, a gentle touch on the shoulder, a timely joke, a compliment so well-placed it felt rehearsed. They left believing he was the soul of the Sterling lantern, but to his staff, he was velvet, hiding a blade. "Sarah, excellent work. The way you handled table 12 was flawless." His voice carried just enough to be heard by all. Then, turning to Ellie, his smile never wavered. "Learn from her, Eleanor. That's our standard." The words cut sharper than a shout. Ellie dipped her head, gloved hand tightening around the silver tray until her knuckles whitened. Few noticed, except Arthur Sterling. Arthur swirled his wine, eyes fixed on the girl. He always sat at the same table. French onion soup, Bordeaux, crème brûlée. To most, he was just a wealthy old man clinging to habit. But this place was more than a routine. It was a memory. His late wife's dream, preserved brick by brick, crystal by crystal. Tonight, that memory felt tainted. He had read faces for decades across boardrooms, knowing when a smile was a mask, when charm hid rot. And here, in the golden glow of his wife's dream, he saw it again. A predator hiding behind charisma, and a young woman forced to swallow her fear. Julian leaned closer to another guest, laughter rolling smooth as silk. Ellie passed behind, shoulders squared, steps even. Arthur Sterling watched them both, and it felt like watching a pane of glass splinter. The guests saw only luxury, but Arthur knew, once the crack appears, it always spreads. Arthur Sterling never believed in accidents. In business, a spilled glass of water at the negotiating table could reveal more than a signed contract. Tonight, he decided to test. He tilted his water glass, just enough for it to slip, droplets scattering across the polished mahogany and into the thick carpet. Julian appeared almost instantly, sighing with theatrical patience. His face turned toward the guest with gentle regret. Such a shame. I'll have it taken care of right away." His voice was silk, but the flick of his hand behind his back was a command. Ellie was there in the next breath. Calm, efficient, she bent down, white cloth already in hand, tray still balanced perfectly in the other. Not a wasted motion. Arthur saw the difference. Julian performed for the room. Ellie restored order in silence. One played to the crowd, the other carried the weight. In the following days, Arthur's suspicion sharpened. He noticed peculiar charges on his bills: special service fee, minor emergency repair, small sums, but consistent, deliberate. When asked, Julian only laughed and brushed it away. "You know how these systems are, Mr. Sterling. A glitch here and there. I'll fix it." That smile, Arthur had seen it countless times on fraudsters in boardrooms, a mask of charm stretched over rot. One evening, Ellie froze. The smell of hot iron drifted from the kitchen, faint, harmless to anyone else, but to her it was a blade slicing through memory. She was back that night. The restaurant had been empty, chairs stacked, chandeliers dimmed. She had lingered with her sketchbook open under the warm glow, pencil tracing quick lines of faces she had seen that day. Then, from the office behind her, Julian's voice spilled through the cracked door, smug and careless. 2 sets of books, one for the board, one for me. 10 grand a month, clean as a whistle. Her hand had stilled, heart hammering. She rose, ready to leave quietly, but he was already there in the doorway, silhouette filling the frame. "Curious little artist, aren't we?" His voice is no longer smooth, but gravelly, a predator's growl. She had backed away, sketchbook slipping from her trembling hands. His grip was sudden, iron tight around her wrist. Then, before she could scream, before she could break free, he shoved her hand flat against a cast-iron skillet still glowing red from the stove. The sound was inhuman, skin searing on metal, a hiss that drowned her scream. The smell of burning flesh mixed with oil was acrid and suffocating. Julian's face hovered inches from hers, no shock, no regret, no trace of accident. Only cold, perverse satisfaction. His lips curled in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "A terrible accident," he whispered, each word deliberate. "Consider it a reminder. Your artist's hands are fragile. Your career, even more so." The memory ripped Ellie back to the present. The cloth in her hand trembled. A glass nearly tipped from her tray. She caught it just in time, the waitress's smile snapping back onto her face like a mask. But Arthur Sterling, watching from his corner, saw the tremor in her fingers, the shadow that briefly consumed her eyes. Later that night, after closing, Arthur unlocked Julian's office with the master key. The room was dark, lit only by the thin blade of light from the street outside. No secret ledger. The man was too clever. But in the cabinet, Arthur found a thick personnel file. Eleanor Vance. Page after page of accusations. Insubordination. Careless spills. Customer complaints. Lies carefully typed. Methodically planted. A noose of paper waiting to strangle her credibility. Arthur photographed every page with his phone. The glow lit his lined face, etching resolve into every wrinkle. He pulled out a worn business card and dialed. "David," he said, voice steady as steel. "I need a forensic accountant, the best you've got." A pause, then a single word on the other end. "Done." Arthur hung up, standing in the dim office. The city's glow cut across Julian's desk like a fracture line. And Arthur knew. The porcelain had cracked. And cracks, once born, only spread. Soon, the gilded cage called the Sterling lantern would shatter. Julian Croft began to see ghosts in the mirrors. In the polished glass of the bar, he sometimes caught the reflection of an old man at table 7, watching. Other times, it was the faint silhouette of a black glove against crystal, a reminder that someone he thought broken was still standing. He didn't know who was watching, but he knew he was being watched, and fear made him more dangerous. One afternoon, he switched orders in the system. Ellie carried beef Wellington to table 14, but the guests were waiting for salmon. Murmurs of irritation rippled. Julian swept in with his usual grace, soothing the customers, then turned to Ellie with that radiant smile sharpened like a knife. "Eleanor, are you struggling to read simple tickets? Or do we need someone else to do it for you?" A few staff chuckled nervously. Ellie flushed, but her voice was steady. "I'll bring the correct dish right away, sir." She walked off, tray rigid in her grip, knuckles whitening beneath the glove. The next evening, Julian accidentally spilled a bottle of olive oil across the service path. Ellie's heel slipped, the tray in her hands tilting dangerously. In a split second, she corrected, only a few drops spilling. Julian clapped slowly, mock applause echoing. "Bravo, Eleanor. Perhaps you've got a future in the circus, if not here." Some staff forced awkward laughs. Ellie said nothing, crouching to clean, her back straight as steel. Arthur Sterling sat silent, observing, letting each cruel game carve deeper into his certainty. The storm crested with the arrival of a food critic. The entire restaurant thrummed with tension. Julian lingered near the kitchen, eyes sharp. Ellie delivered a bowl of soup, already tampered with. Julian had laced it with salt. The critic tasted, grimaced, and spoke loud enough for every diner to hear. Far too salty. The room froze. Julian rushed forward, arms open, voice honeyed. "My sincerest apologies, sir. We'll prepare another dish immediately." Then he turned, his voice rising for everyone. "I cannot believe this carelessness, Eleanor. Are you trying to destroy our reputation?" The entire room's gaze fell on her. Ellie stood, her spine unbending, though her face burned. "I'm sorry," she said evenly. "I'll replace it at once." No excuses, no tears, just dignity in the fire. Arthur saw it, the flame of someone who refused to be broken. That night, Ellie sat in the locker room, eyes red but dry. She tugged at the glove, her scarred hand trembling in the dim light. The door creaked. Miguel, the old head chef, stepped in carrying a cup of tea. He said nothing at first, then he placed a small USB drive in her hand. "The kitchen cameras," he murmured. "It overwrites after 48 hours. Tonight's footage is still there." His gaze held hers, weary but unwavering. Ellie clutched the drive like a lifeline. Across town, Arthur Sterling read the forensic report. The numbers were merciless. Over $200,000 siphoned in 18 months. Fake invoices, phantom vendors, money wired abroad. He closed the laptop, eyes hardening. He didn't just want Julian gone. He wanted justice. Arthur picked up the phone. "Friday night, emergency board meeting, at the Sterling Lantern. Bring the lawyer. Bring the accountant." Another call. "This is Sterling. I have evidence of embezzlement and fraud. I want 2 detectives ready. Wait for my signal." Outside, the city blazed, horns blaring, neon flickering like a restless heartbeat. Inside his apartment, Arthur stood by the glass, Manhattan's skyline glittering like a battlefield map. The pieces were in place, every move calculated. The Sterling Lantern would be the stage, and the storm was coming. Friday night. The last guests had gone, jazz silenced, only the chandeliers burning above empty tables. The staff gathered in uneasy rows, summoned for a mandatory meeting. The air was tight, like the moments before a storm. Julian Croft stood at the front, suit impeccable, face grave as if he were a priest preparing to deliver judgment. "The Sterling Lantern thrives on excellence," he declared, his voice carrying a heavy solemnity that wasn't real. "One weak link can poison the whole. And tonight," he paused, scanning the room, letting his gaze land on Ellie like a knife. "With deep regret, I must remove that link. Eleanor Vance will no longer—" The heavy doors creaked open. Arthur Sterling entered, no longer the anonymous old man in plain clothes. Tonight he wore a deep blue suit, a silver tie, and shoes shining like mirrors. He walked slowly, but every step radiated authority that hushed the room more effectively than Julian's booming voice ever had. Behind him came two figures, a sharp-eyed woman clutching a leather case, the lawyer, and a gaunt man with sunken cheeks but eyes that burned with clarity, the forensic accountant. The room froze. Forks of fear darted through Julian's polished mask. "Mr. Sterling," he stuttered. Only now did he realize the name above the door was not a coincidence. Arthur stepped into the center. His voice was calm, yet it reverberated in the stillness. "Julian, I think your speech is premature. The real meeting begins now." The lawyer set her laptop on a table, projecting slides onto the wall. Page after page appeared. Ledgers in duplicate, figures manipulated, invoices from phantom suppliers, lines of money traced into overseas accounts bearing Julian's name. A low murmur spread, the staff exchanging looks of disbelief, anger, betrayal. Whispers rose into gasps. Julian's face blanched, then twisted. He forced a brittle laugh. "Fabrications. Anyone can forge spreadsheets. This is a setup." His voice cracked at the edges. Arthur didn't answer. He simply gave a small nod. Miguel, the old chef, stepped forward, shoulders stooped but hands steady as he plugged in the USB. The projection shifted. Grainy footage filled the wall. Julian in the kitchen, leaning over the soup pot, pouring in salt with deliberate intent. Seconds later, Ellie appeared, carrying the bowl out. The room erupted. Gasps, curses, a chorus of voices colliding. Staff covered their mouths. Others turned on Julian with wide eyes, rage and recognition burning. The facade was crumbling in real time. Julian snapped, sweat beading across his temple. He jabbed a finger at Ellie, spittle flying as he shouted, "It was her! She set me up! That bitch has always hated me!" Silence fell again, deeper than before. All eyes turned to Ellie. She stepped forward slowly, her steps echoing in the room. Her back is straight, her breathing was measured, and when she spoke, her voice was not loud, but it was unbreakable. "No, Julian, I never hated you." She let the words hang in the air. "I was afraid of you." Then, in deliberate silence, she pulled at the glove. One finger at a time, the black leather sliding free. The room leaned forward. At last, the glove came off, and the scar was revealed under the harsh golden light. The flesh was twisted, mottled red and white, puckered like melted wax. It was ugly, undeniable, unforgettable. The sound that escaped the room was collective. Gasps, whispers, the scrape of a chair leg as someone recoiled. One young waitress covered her mouth. A busboy muttered, "God," under his breath. Ellie raised her hand higher, not as a wound, but as a banner. Her eyes locked on Julian. "You did this to me," she said, voice sharp as a blade. "You stole my safety. You tried to steal my future, but you failed." Her scar, gleaming in the light, was no longer his victory. It was her proof. Julian staggered back. The doors opened once more. Two detectives entered, their badges flashing like steel. "Julian Croft," one announced. "You are under arrest for embezzlement and fraud." The metallic click of handcuffs snapped like a gunshot. Julian flinched, thrashing, his voice rising into desperation. "You'll regret this. This place will crumble without me." But no one moved to defend him. The staff he had bullied now stared at him with cold, unwavering eyes. One by one they stepped aside, giving the detectives room, as though the restaurant itself was expelling him. As Julian was dragged out, his curses echoing down the hallway, the doors shut behind him with a thundering finality. Arthur Sterling turned back to the staff, his gaze sweeping across faces once bowed by fear. They were different now. And then his eyes settled on Ellie, still standing with her scar bared in the light like a torch. In that moment, Arthur understood. The battle was over, but something greater had just begun. The heavy doors slammed shut behind Julian Croft, his protests fading into nothing but echoes in the hallway. For a moment, the staff of the Sterling Lantern stood frozen, caught between disbelief and release. The chandeliers above flickered slightly, their golden light bathing the room in an uneasy stillness, as if even the building itself was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. Arthur Sterling turned to face them. He didn't look like a victorious owner basking in triumph. He looked like a man bearing the weight of regret. His shoulders sagged slightly, his hand lingering on the back of a chair as though steadying himself. His voice, when it came, was rough but steady, cutting through the silence. "I am sorry," he said, every word deliberate. "I let a cancer grow in my wife's house. I should have seen it sooner. Instead, I looked at the surface, the shine, the illusion. And you, all of you, suffered for my blindness." No one replied at first, but the silence no longer carried fear. It was the silence of people trying to process freedom, a silence of air returning to lungs that had been compressed for years. Arthur's gaze found Ellie. She stood in the center, her gloveless hand still bare, the scar glistening faintly under the chandelier. No longer a mark of shame. It looked almost like a torch, a wound transformed into light. He stepped toward her, and when he spoke, he didn't look at the scar. He looked at her eyes. "Miss Vance," he said softly, "you didn't just survive. You carried the soul of this place when the rest of us were blind. When everyone else bowed, you stayed standing." He paused, his tone deepening. "The Sterling Lantern needs a manager with heart and a spine of steel. That position is yours if you want it." A ripple of shock ran through the room. Staff who had once whispered behind her back now turned, wide-eyed. For the first time, Ellie wasn't the outsider. She was the center. Respect, and something like hope, was dawning in their faces. Ellie's throat tightened. Her lips parted, but no words came. She had endured Julian's cruelty in silence for so long that speech itself felt foreign. Arthur's expression softened, and he lowered his voice. "And I read your file, the Academy of Art." He hesitated, a flicker of memory shadowing his face. His late wife's dream, the reason this restaurant existed. "In her name, I will create a scholarship. You will be the first recipient. Chase your art, Ellie. Don't ever let anyone steal it from you again." The words struck her harder than any insult Julian had ever thrown. Tears welled, hot and uncontrollable. Though she tried to blink them back, for the first time in months, the tears weren't from pain, but from the sudden, almost unbearable weight of being seen. Around them, the staff began to disperse slowly, voices hushed but transformed. Gone were the fearful whispers of old. Now there was energy, tentative but real, the hum of possibility. Ellie remained. The restaurant was empty now, chairs stacked, silver polished and waiting for a new dawn. The city's glow filtered through the tall windows. stretching long golden stripes across the mahogany floor. The chandeliers swayed gently above her, their light no longer harsh, but warm. She untied her apron and folded it neatly, placing it on the bar. Her scarred hand lingered above it for a moment before she lifted it into the air, catching the faint glow of the streetlights outside. The twisted skin shone, no longer a symbol of defeat, but of endurance. Proof that she had not broken. Proof that she was still here. She walked to the window, standing tall, the city sprawling endlessly beyond the glass. Skyscrapers glittered like constellations against the night, pulsing with life. To others, New York might look ruthless, cold, unreachable. To her, it looked like a horizon, wide open, calling her forward. Her lips curved into a smile, small but real, the first honest smile in months. It trembled with exhaustion, but it held steady with freedom. The Sterling lantern was no longer a gilded cage. It had become her launch pad. And for Ellie Vance, for every scarred survivor who dared to stand, the dawn had finally arrived. You see, scars are not just reminders of pain. They are living proof of survival. They are the chapters written on our skin, whispering, "You endured. You're still here." Ellie Vance walked into the Sterling lantern as nothing more than a waitress, invisible to most, silenced by fear. Yet it was her quiet dignity, her kindness, and her unbreakable will that turned her into the flame that exposed the darkness and lit a path for everyone around her. Julian Croft chose manipulation, cruelty, and greed. For a while, it looked like he owned the stage, but when the mask cracked, all he had left was the sound of steel cuffs locking around his wrists. That is the fate of arrogance without conscience. It always collapses under its own weight. This story teaches us something powerful. True strength doesn't come from a polished smile or the illusion of control. It comes from the way you rise when you've been pushed to the floor, from the way you still hold your head high when the world tries to bend you, from the courage to take off the glove, reveal the scar, and say, "You didn't break me." And now I ask you, what about you? Have you ever carried a scar, visible or invisible, that changed you forever? Have you ever stood tall in the face of those who tried to diminish you? Share your story in the comments, because your voice, your survival, might be the light someone else desperately needs tonight. If this story touched your heart, don't just keep it to yourself. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Toch's Story. Because there are many more stories waiting. Stories that will stir your soul, break your heart, and remind you that even in the darkest moments, the dawn always comes.